Turmeric starves cancer cells to death. Now, I love turmeric. It's one of my 4 core supplements I and my patients take. There's much more, however, to turmeric than just skin and inflammation, and many of you have asked me to talk about the anti-cancer benefits and prevention. Today, we'll do just that. I'll look at a newer study that is talking about how there's a mechanism of action for starving cancer cells that's different from the one that we typically think of, which is inflammation. Of note here, MD Anderson, amongst many other cancer centers, have indeed tested it for cancer of the pancreas and done detailed analysis of dosage and bioavailability. Many other cancers as well, and I'll outline today. Its attraction is that it blocks that major step that causes cancer, one that links inflammation to cancer and cancer progression. If you follow my videos, you know we oft talk about inflammation, inflammaging, and the fact that turmeric, amongst other supplements, I'll say, or foods, attacks things as an anti-inflammatory. But curcumin is the only drug we have that blocks this particular step. Number one, yes, I called it a drug. I'd say it's the closest supplement we have to becoming a drug. One big stumbling block for being FDA approved is it has poor absorption. So we have to establish a cause and effect. That's very hard when you can't get predictable levels from eating it. Now, you can give it IV. I've had it personally IV. So you put an IV line in, you put a bag up of curcumin, it takes about an hour to get, because it does burn a little bit, you drip it in. Now, I have no vested interest. I don't have an IV bar. I don't do IV infusions of curcumin. I'm just sharing that with you. As a side note, curcumin, as a reminder, is the active ingredient in turmeric. So turmeric, whether you take it as the root or you take it as a supplement, the active form is curcumin. That's why I'm saying curcumin and turmeric interchangeably. Number 2 in there of note is that inflammatory pathway is known, but today I'm going to show you one different pathway that people are looking at, which is the energy pathway. But first, understand there are existing today over 4,000 published studies that describe the anti-cancer effects of curcumin. Today's study, as I said, is going to be about that additional mechanism that starves the cancer cell of energy. Keep in mind the cost benefit of curcumin is highly favorable with minimal downside. So the fact that it's not an FDA approved drug, understanding that some supplements that we take do have a lot of side effects. Coming to mind would be something like garlic, and I have videos on that. I like garlic, but a lot of people can't take it. Keep in mind the cost benefit of curcumin is highly favorable with minimal downsides. You can't say that of all supplements such as garlic. Sometimes garlic, not everyone can take it, and that's why we look at things like black garlic that have more favorable side effect profiles often in our patients. In fact, studies have been done with turmeric of about 8 grams. If you take on average a supplement, that's about 800 milligrams. So 1/10 the dose is what you see in your supplements. If you're already supplementing with it, look on your vitamin, it will be labeled. Here's mine, you can see there's 800 milligrams. I add ginger, quercetin, bioperine. Now I talked about the absorption. Pepper is something that increases it multiple fold for absorbing it if we're taking it orally. Now if you're using turmeric root, taking pepper helps. Absorption is a very key element with turmeric. Also, as an aside, we often think that maybe the turmeric doesn't just get its effect from being in the bloodstream, but actually affects the gut and has such a favorable profile in the gut that there's mechanism of action through the bowel without it even having to be absorbed. So you can see many more studies are coming, but let's get into today's one on starving cancer. So cancer cells are, in simple terms, cells that are growing out of control. They're not abiding by the cell reproduction limiting mechanisms that our body has in place. Thus, cancer cells require a tremendous amount of energy to promote this rapid growth. This new study we're talking about today shows how curcumin can selectively starve tumor cells. Selectively is going to be a key. This mechanism is especially appealing for cancer chemoprevention because it would target the great majority of cancers, because this pathway exists in many cancers. I'll outline a few specific cancers at the end that have been extensively studied with curcumin. The starving we're talking about occurs by depriving the cells of their ability to make and use ATP. Many of you have heard of this. It's the energy currency within the cells, adenosine triphosphate. Since most cancer cells generate ATP in a different way than healthy cells, the curcumin selectively kills tumor cells with no impact on the healthy tissues. And this is exactly what we're trying to do with any form of chemotherapy. We wanted to target, and that's why you hear of gene targeting is the next big thing. You see, cancer cells have a very unusual oxygen-free mechanism of extracting energy from glucose to produce this ATP. It's what makes them function, or allows them to do this. Normal cells, they do require a lot of oxygen, and this is normally one of those limiting factors that I mentioned that stops out of control growth. But the cancer cells, on the other hand, they can survive in this low oxygen environment because they can grow rapidly without it. So by attacking that mechanism, that's a very specific way to target fast-growing cells. Since many types of cancer use this metabolic kind of a trick to extract the energy, the researchers studied curcumin's impact on a variety of tumor cell lines. So in this study, they didn't just look at one tumor cell line. They looked at things like leukemia, breast, melanoma, and colon cancers. Let's look at the findings here. I'll outline them in rough form, and then we'll look at the study to see some key points. So that way, if you do want to read the full study yourself, you can look at it. But what are the key findings that those that want to extract that from this video first? The first part of the study showed that curcumin was able to reduce the levels of ATP synthase. That's the enzyme that creates ATP in all 4 tumor cell lines in culture. Number 2, they found that it could reduce the cellular levels of ATP in 3 of the 4 cell lines that we have in the body. For those wanting to geek out a little bit more, the 4 cell lines are epithelial, endothelial, neuronal, and fibroblast. But number 3, they found there was a lower ratio of higher energy ATP to lower energy AMP in all 4 cell lines. So that's one thing. So they're showing that it can reduce the amount of energy available. Number 2, the next step, they implanted aggressive skin cancer cells or melanoma cells into live mice. Half of the mice were treated with curcumin and the other half served as a control group. Just 2 days into the study, the curcumin treated mice were demonstrating significantly slower tumor growth. The tumor growth had remained significantly slower for the entire period of the study. Not surprisingly, and here's the kicker, the ATP synthase, ATP levels, and the ATP to AMP ratio were significantly lowered in the curcumin group. These results give us a clue that the energy starvation was the mechanism of action by which curcumin slowed this growth. One of the energy starvation treatments we do for tumors is to cut off the blood supply by embolization, but it's much better to do this with a non-toxic supplement if possible. In other words, we know the tumors need more blood supply to grow, so radiologically you can put a catheter in, you could find out where the tumor's growing the most, and boom, just like a stroke in the brain is where you stop blood supply to an area, that's a negative kind of a stroke. You can induce a stroke to a tumor so that you get less blood flow to it. But this would do it through a supplement, through a non-toxic element. That's the idea here. Slow down blood supply. Next is, can the curcumin prevent new blood vessel growth? So cancers need this blood vessel growth and development to support all the nutrients of these rapidly growing cells. Blocking this process is an important way to limit the growth and the spread of a tumor. After removing the tumors from the mice, in this exact study, the researchers found that the curcumin supplemented animals' tumors had fewer new blood vessels. So there you go. Again, that other mechanism of action seems to be at play. This indicates that the curcumin reduced the tumor's nutrient energy access by limiting blood flow. So there's a lot to unpack here, and some of it we're inferring from what we're seeing in the study. But nevertheless, it is that other mechanism of action, and how that exact interplay is, of course, we don't know. You're just inferring from those three elements I aforementioned talk about, and looking at the fact that there is reduced blood flow, and then you kind of connect the dots. Of course, more studies, and very particular specific ones, will be done to study exactly that mechanism. Okay, let's look at this article here. Carcinogenesis 2018, okay, that's when it was done and published. Curcumin induces a fatal energetic impairment in tumor cells in vitro, meaning in a test tube, in vitro, outside of life, and in vivo, meaning in a living organism, by inhibiting ATP synthase activity. So let's move on in this article here. And if we scroll down, let's look at this abstract so you can see what we're talking about here. If we look, so curcumin has been reported to inhibit inflammation. We talk about that so much in the body, in the joints, in the eyes, in the skin. But here, inflammation and tumor growth. Angiogenesis, that's the production of new blood vessels. And VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, VEGF, that's something I talk about with PRF, platelet-rich fibrin. And metastasis by decreasing cell growth and inducing apoptosis, mainly through the inhibition of nuclear factor kappa. That's the one we know about. Now, apoptosis is the death of cells. It's how the body gets rid of cells. It's a natural way that cells die off. So to read that again, curcumin has been reported to inhibit inflammation, tumor growth, angiogenesis, and metastasis by decreasing cell growth and by inducing the death of cells, mainly through that nuclear factor kappa. And that's a master regulator of inflammation. So very important to know. Recent reports also indicated potential metabolic effects of the polyphenol. Polyphenol is turmeric, it's a polyphenol. Therefore, they analyzed whether and how it affects the energy metabolism of tumor cells. We show, so they talk about what they found, that curcumin inhibits the activity of ATP synthase, isolated mitochondrial membranes, leading to a dramatic drop of ATP and a reduction of oxygen consumption in vitro and in vivo tumor models. Very important, because just something in vitro, something that you show outside of a body, doesn't mean you can extrapolate it to a living thing or being. In this case, they did both. The effects of curcumin on ATP synthase are independent of the inhibition of that NF-kappa B. So it was a new or a different mechanism, let's say that, that did not affect the ATP synthase. Goes on to say, moreover, curcumin induces apoptosis, the killing of the cells, by promoting the generation of reactive oxygen species. Now you hear a lot more about ROS, reactive oxygen species. According to the in vitro anti-tumor effect, curcumin, and that's the dose, significantly delayed in vivo, so in the mice, cancer growth, likely due to an energy impairment, but also through the reduction of tumor angiogenesis. So also through the reduction of increasing blood vessels to supply oxygen and nutrients. So there's another mechanism. These results establish the ATP synthase, a central enzyme of the cellular energy metabolism, as a target of the curcumin, leading to inhibition of cancer cell growth and general reprogramming of tumor metabolism. Absolutely huge. Let's go on to look. I want to show you just something in the introduction here because it gives you an idea a little bit of all these studies that have been done. So curcumin is a polyphenol. It's isolated from curcuma longa, which is turmeric. In turmeric, it is used as a spice and forms the basic yellow ingredient of curry. In recent years, many studies have reported anti-tumoral effects of curcumin, even for solid cancers after dietary administration. Despite reduced bioavailability, poor absorption, rapid metabolism, rapid systemic elimination, and the low levels of detectable blood curcumin in treated patients. I talk about the absorption all the time, how we have to maximize it, but also understand that there's probably other effects that aren't from blood levels, but from intestinal function that we're just starting to learn. So I wanted to give you that background because when I talk about when to take turmeric, the absorption, these studies compile where the information comes from. Curcumin and its derivatives and analogs have been reported to act by influencing many of the cell signaling pathways that I talked to you already about. This is huge. I want to just highlight this within the results of the study. Anti-angiogenic effects of curcumin in vivo. Curcumin has been reported to exert anti-angiogenic effects in vitro and in vivo. So it stops that blood, new vessel blood supply that's nourishing the tumor. And we therefore analyze vessel number and sizes after treatment of mice with curcumin or vehicle. So there was a placebo. Some of the mice got the curcumin, some got a vehicle, which was inactive, using antibodies against the endothelial cell markers. Curcumin caused a significant reduction in the numbers of positive vessels per area, indicating that the systemically administered polyphenol, curcumin, has anti-angiogenic activities in the xenografts. Huge. I also want to highlight this. Growing evidence of anti-diabetic effects of curcumin. You know how prominent metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, high insulin levels, and diabetes is in our culture. Mainly, in my opinion, almost, not all, but a huge amount of it is diet-induced, is what we're eating. And its influence on cell metabolism have stimulated our interest in its potential activities on tumor metabolism. Recent studies show that the limitation of nutrient supply to the energetically highly active tumor cells can drastically alter tumor metabolism as a consequence of tumor cells by way of the ability to grow. It has recently been postulated that curcumin acts as a calorie restriction mimetic. Calorie restriction mimetic. We talk about intermittent fasting quite a bit, and calorie restriction, there's a lot of studies, calorie restriction diets, fasting, is that it's helpful. I know there are some recent ones against it, but I think there is a lot there to unpack, and there are going to be benefits. It's pinning it down. Personally, for me, like today, we're at 1 p.m., I haven't eaten anything. Very common for me not to eat until 2 or 3, and then I eat at 8 or 9 at night. So by nature, I'm getting a period of fasting. But you see where all of this kind of comes together, and a lot of the information I'm giving you when, how to take it, comes from studies like this. And they are absolutely continuing, and this is a necessary area of research that needs to be ongoing. But I always bring the snippets and pieces of advice and give it to you in my videos. So curcumin, found in turmeric, has long been known to possess tumor-fighting properties, but this most recent study that we're looking at today added that abundance of evidence pointing to curcumin's potent cancer-fighting abilities. So let me know in the comment section, did you like this video? Do you want more of them? Do you like the deep dives? I'm reading these studies anyway. It's pretty easy for me to present them to you. Stay tuned here. Keep your skin and body beautiful, healthy, and vibrant.